Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we are going to be talking about episode 4 of Loki, this new Marvel show on Disney Plus, and man, am I enjoying the hell out of it. I think this will probably be, I said it at the first episode and I'm saying it now again, I think this will end up being my favorite of the Marvel shows. I have been loving Loki so far. So of course we're going to be talking about the new episode of Loki here again at 2 a.m. because of course we stayed up this late and I'm excited to talk about all these spoilery things in this episode. So if you have not yet seen episode 4 of Loki, do not watch this video because there was a lot that happened in this episode that I am very, very much excited to talk about. And I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on this episode as well. So let's go crazy and talk about Loki episode 4. So since this is a recap and review, let's start off right at the beginning because we get to see a young Sylvie or young Loki variant that is essentially snatched as a child. She's very young. She's played by the actress of who plays Judith in The Walking Dead, the older Judith in The Walking Dead, but she gets snatched essentially by Ravonna Renslayer. That's the person who is essentially the judge now. She has earned her way up in terms of the ranks of the TVA, and she was the one who snatched her as a child. And so Sylvie essentially grew up in apocalypses, essentially is what she says. She escapes early on and she bounces between all the apocalypses. She finds out pretty early on how to survive in this way in terms of being a character who wasn't supposed to exist. Her existence is, according to the TVA, is a bad thing and she shouldn't exist and she shouldn't be around and all these things that she shouldn't be, and that has really damaged her throughout all of her growing up. And I do wish we learned more about this in the previous episode because I have heard some complaints about the last episode feeling like a filler episode, but it did establish the relationship between Sylvie and Loki in the last episode that I really think came into play in this episode as well, which we will get into later in the episode. But I love the backstory that we got with Sylvie's character, especially her and Loki talking at the brink of death, and that connection that they have when they look at each other and they hold each other's hands as, you know, the moon, or I guess the planet, is about to collapse into the moon of Lamentus 1, and it is just a great, powerful moment. But because of this, a very strange thing happens at the TVA because we have Owen Wilson and of course Ravonna Renslayer talking about all these things, and they see a branch break out upon the timeline. And this is one thing that I noticed, which at the end of the second episode, all these, you know, pruning devices came and destroyed all the different, you know, places. Sylvie dropped those in a bunch of different places in the sacred timeline, and all these things, all this chaos started happening in the TVA, and I was kind of expecting the third episode to go into that aspect of the chaos of all of that, but in this episode that all seemed to be gone already, which makes sense because if she were to drop all those things into different spots in the sacred timeline, I guess the TVA, all they have to do is they have to go to those different branches, drop their own pruning devices, and erase that branch of themselves, because all she did was create branches. Enough chaos to, her plan essentially was to create enough chaos for her to sneak in, get in that elevator, and to confront the timekeepers, those time overlords that we keep on hearing about, those space lizards that control the sacred timeline. And I guess that does make sense. It did cross my mind at the beginning of this and seems like, oh, that kind of build up at the end of this episode 2 didn't really lead anywhere, but that's because we didn't really know where this show was truly leading, and it's going to a place that I wasn't expecting. So the two variants get captured by the TVA because they were able to create that branch that was going really far. It really branched off really quickly, and even the TVA and Owen Wilson's character MOBIUS is very confused as to why that happened. So they branch off, they separate them into different rooms, and he starts interrogating Loki once again. And again, I love the chemistry between Owen Wilson and Tom Hiddleston in this show, and the banter back and forth, that's camaraderie that they have between each other, being kind of frenemies essentially. They're not quite on the same page all the time. They really don't like each other to a certain extent, but they also are very similar in terms of how they're equally as smart. And even Owen Wilson says in this episode that he's playing chess and Loki's playing checkers, but I think they're both playing two different games of chess because they are that twisted, they're that manipulative towards each other, and I think that relationship is very, very entertaining to watch. This scene essentially climaxes in a moment where Loki decides to finally tell the truth because he's been trying to twist the words. He's been trying to say that he was behind the whole scheme of Sylvie, and an interesting thing happens with MOBIUS saying that the the Sylvie variant was pruned and was destroyed, and she's no longer a thing anymore. And Loki's reaction, Tom Hiddleston's performance in this was really crushing. And I did say at the end of last episode that I thought they were possibly having a relationship between two different versions of Loki, and I asked if that was weird, and then I checked Twitter, and they were also saying that that was weird, and I was like, okay, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned and shipped them together, because I think they work great together, and their chemistry is great. But essentially, that's what the show is going for. They're trying to put together these two Lokis, and putting across that idea that maybe that relationship between those two that they had formed, that liking of each other that they formed, that narcissistic love interest relationship of him loving himself that much that the only person that he can truly love is a different version of himself, which is a very interesting concept, but kind of makes sense when you think about the character of Loki, and that is what caused that branch. And then Loki, in one last-ditch effort, tells Mobius that the entirety of the TVA are variants themselves. They were not created by the Timekeepers. They were plucked out of their lives. Maybe Mobius had his jet ski back in the 90s. Maybe that's where he came from. Maybe that's where all his memories are from. But he tells him that, and Mobius denies it at first, but is continually lying to himself. Mobius sticks Loki into this time loop, essentially, of Lady Sif, who finally came back, which I'm very excited that this actress has had a chance to come back, because she was not in Thor Ragnarok. She was not killed with the rest of the Warriors 3, and that's fun to see her back. I believe she's going to be back possibly in Thor Love and Thunder. I really hope she is back, because I want to see more of her character, and to see her continually punch and knee him in the balls in this episode, in this time loop, was very entertaining to see Loki essentially dealing with the fact that, yes, he was a complete jerk and asshole throughout the entirety of his life, but he even gets to a point where he's able to say and admit that to Lady Sif, and she doesn't do it. So, character arc, he has learned his lessons. In the meanwhile, Mobius is going on his own investigations, trying to figure out what is happening. He has a conversation with Ravonna Renslayer about different things, about what's going on. He's prying at what happened to C20, and she's saying that C20 was pruned because she had lost her mind, and she wasn't talking by the end of it, and it was clearly a bunch of lies, and Mobius was catching on to that. So he decides to take her tempad in terms of trying to figure out what really happened. In the meantime, you have B15, who, this actress is amazing in Lovecraft Country, and she is even better in this show. Her performance in this episode alone, the very little screen time that she has in the show, is very good, because she takes Sylvie and she has a conversation with her because she had gotten her mind in the second episode, and so she's trying to figure out what those memories were, and Sylvie essentially tells her that she is a variant, and she shows her her past, and this entire sequence, it doesn't flash between all these things. It's show, don't tell, and you get to see on her face her reaction, her acting in that scene in the rain was phenomenal. And that turn was very, very cool to see, that these different TVA agents are realizing that they had a greater life outside of the TVA, and that was taken from them. Mobius is able to see through the tempad that C20 did actually, well, she wasn't losing her mind, she didn't lose her voice, she didn't have nothing to say by the end of it. She had a lot to say by the end of it. She was trying to convince everybody that everybody was variants, and that the TVA was lying, and that Sylvie changed her perspective on anything. And of course, Ravonna was there to stop the recording, to cancel everything out. So Mobius is now on the side of Loki. They reconcile with each other. He goes, gets him from the time loop, and they go out, and the most heartbreaking scene ever happens. Ravonna has Mobius pruned. Owen Wilson is pruned in this episode, and it was the most heartbreaking and shocking thing, because I'm like, okay, we're ready, Loki's gonna go save the day, and this entire episode was subverting expectations, which is what I loved so much about it, because that is the last thing I was expecting when they walked out of that gate, and to see all of them stanced out right in front of them, and to have Owen Wilson say that maybe my best memory, maybe the one place I would go is where I should be, maybe I would go to a place where I have my jet ski, and his final act of, I guess, rebellion against the TVA in this moment, against Ravonna Renslayer, this person that he has grown to care about, in terms of the, seeing the relationship that they had formed in this episode and in episode 1, and all these different things. To see her prune him, and even her reaction is heartbreaking, because she seems to have some sort of care for him as well. And there was that thing in the first episode with the pen that she had, and he was saying, oh, what other person gave you this pen? Like, what memory is this that's so important to you? And I think that was a different version of Mobius. I think that the Mobius we have was not the first and only Mobius that was, plopped into the TVA, taken away from his timeline, because she likes him, because he is a good agent. Maybe she had pruned him before in the past, but it still hurts her. And so that plan didn't work, and so you have Ravonna get Sylvie, and they get Loki. They're leading them down the hall, and in another very, very touching moment between, I guess, Sylvie's character with her past, she asks Renslayer if she remembers what events, what Nexus events caused her to be plucked from her timeline, for her to be plucked away from her life, because she was just sitting there playing with like a toy boat. That's all she was doing, and the TV swooped in and stole her from her home, from Asgard, and just like, why? And Ravonna being who she is, and this is so telling for her character, which makes her such an intriguing villain character in this episode, was that she just simply says that she doesn't remember what was so life-changing, what was so important to Sylvie's character means nothing to Ravonna, the person who took her from her home. And that was just heartbreaking. But they are led into this room with the timekeepers, these three on the pedestal, this very awesome looking room with smoke everywhere, weird trippy designs going all over the place, and Loki and Sylvia are presented in front of them. The timekeepers ask if there is, or I guess they essentially ask if they have any last words, and they say their last words, they say their remarks, and then B20 shows up, and there's a pretty mediocre fight scene, if I'm being honest. This episode was great with the dialogue and with the story and with the plots, but in terms of the fight scene, kind of weak. I'm not sure if it was a stunts thing or because they filmed this all during COVID that they couldn't have the close contact, they couldn't have the stunt team as invested in terms of these fights as they would have otherwise. And I think that might have been the issue with this fight scene, or maybe it was the editing. It was back and forth between, Sylvie fighting some guards and then Loki fighting some guards and then Sylvie fighting Ravonna, which that fight, I was like, oh, here we go. And then the editing was just like, man, I wish that moment was better, but it did end in a moment where Sylvie throws the spear that she has at the timekeeper and the head falls off the thing, and it's an android. So I guess if the timekeeper walked through that one zappy thing in the first episode, they would have been disintegrated because they were robots, and maybe they didn't know they were robots. Who knows? But there we go, the timekeepers, at least in terms of this room of the timekeepers, is not real. So it begs a bunch of questions of who actually created the TVA, who is behind the entirety of the TVA. And I don't believe that is Ravonna Renslayer. I was thinking for a moment that she was behind everything. But since she was an agent herself who brought in Sylvie when she was a little girl, that means she's also just a variant. So who is behind all of this? I think that's a huge mystery. We have 2 episodes left to figure out what that truly is, which I'm glad we still have 2 episodes, because maybe the timekeepers are real. Maybe they are space lizards that are controlling everything, but they're not as hands-on as they were meant to believe. And maybe Ravonna herself hasn't met the timekeepers, and she's just blindly believing this world that has tried to keep the sacred timeline in effect, but maybe this is all a lie, or maybe these timekeepers are not as benevolent as we have been told that they are. I honestly have no clue what they're doing with this storyline, and that gets me so excited for these last 2 episodes, because this show has been continually just subverting all expectations and surprises left and right, because you have a great emotional moment between Sylvie and Loki trying to express, because he's never really done this before, that he truly does care about Sylvie and there might be some sort of love between them, which again, I beg the question, is that weird? I still don't know. I don't think it's weird. I'm actually kind of shipping them together. I like it a lot, but like, is it weird? But then all of a sudden, again, subverting expectations, Ravonna prunes Loki. And so now you have MOBIUS and Loki both pruned in this one episode. And this is only episode 4, so now it's just Sylvie threatening Ravonna to say who is behind all this. Tell me everything that you know. And so next episode is going to be quite the ride. But that is not the end of the episode. Yes, credits do play after this moment, but we do have an after credit scene in this episode. So in the after credit scene, we have Loki waking up in what seems to be an apocalyptic New York, it looks like, because I saw that in the trailers. You saw the Avengers Tower all destroyed in the background, and you see it's here, and Loki wakes up in the dirt, and he thinks that he's possibly in hell, and he thinks he's dead, but then this voice of Richard E. Grant starts talking, saying that, no, you're not dead quite yet, and they're going to need to work together to do this, and the camera cuts to them, and it's Richard E. Grant as an older Loki, Jack Veal as a younger Loki, holding an alligator Loki. Yeah? And I'm not going to even try to pronounce this other guy's name, because his name, I don't want to butcher it, but he is essentially playing a different variant version of THOR, which is very interesting to see that now you have Loki, old Loki, young Loki, in this variant of THOR, in this apocalyptic New York. They're not quite dead yet, but they've been pruned, so who knows what this actual pruning does. Is Owen Wilson going to be in this place? What is going on? How are they going to get out of this situation? So many questions, and only 2 episodes left, guys. What do you think of Loki, episode 4. I absolutely loved it. This is by far my favorite episode so far in this series. Did you have any issues with the action sequence, and what do you think happened at the end of the episode 2? Was it just kind of a ploy for Sylvie to get to the timekeepers in that episode, and it didn't really mean as much? I feel like it built up so heavily to something grand, and it didn't end up being that, which is, I'm fine with that, but in the moments when they look at the timeline, it's all normal again. In this episode, I'm like, oh, that was kind of underwhelming. But this episode ended in a bang, and hopefully this is not underwhelming. Hopefully this show sticks to the landing, because there's a lot of ideas presented in this, a lot of questions, and it's a question of, will they answer these questions and will they stick the landing? Because I think that could really kill a show, is if they don't stick the landing, how's it going to be? I think WandaVision definitely stuck the landing. They had the weird things at the beginning and they coalesced together in an awesome finale. So hopefully that this can do the same thing. We have 2 episodes left. I'm very excited to see where they're going with these characters. And again, my main question, is it weird that Loki is interested in his other self? Would you be interested in your other self? These are the questions we need to ask ourselves. So thanks everyone for watching this video of my Loki spoiler review. There's also a reference of vampires that Mobius makes earlier in the episode, which, Blade? I don't know. Could be a Blade reference. We're getting vampires eventually in the Blade movie with Mahershala Ali, so very excited for that. So what did you guys think of this? Comment down below. I'm very excited to talk more about Loki in the next couple weeks. So thanks guys for watching. Stick around on the channel. I will have reviews out for the Tomorrow War with Chris Pratt. It's coming out on Amazon Prime. And I will be watching Zola. Hopefully tomorrow, maybe not. I don't know yet. But I really want to watch Zola and have a review out for that one as well. So thanks guys for watching, and I hope to see you all in my next one.